So from powerful typhoons in Asia to brush fires in the Northeast and some potential storms brewing along the Gulf Coast, extreme weather is making headlines across the globe. Here to help us understand and navigate these developments and their potential impacts is our in-house meteorologist, Dave Margolin. Dave, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Good to be with you.
Now, I do want to talk about the typhoon that we're seeing picking up in Asia right now. What are some of the key driving factors that are starting to form these weather conditions, and how should that region be bracing?
Yeah, so this is a really unusual pattern. We've had now 4 named storms at one time in the Westpac, which in November is unprecedented. So most recently, we just had a storm that moved into Hong Kong. Fortunately, it's dissipating. It was relatively weak. A much stronger storm, kind of similar to a major hurricane here, just moved across northern Philippines. Now, the northern Philippines, interestingly enough, is an area that sees more typhoons than just about anywhere else on Earth. So they are prepared for something like this, but still it's a strong storm. That storm is then going to move into Taiwan in the next couple days, a weaker storm. And then finally, 2 days or so after that, another strong storm is expected to impact northern Philippines.
Can you talk to us more about how this storm will specifically impact energy and supply chain sectors?
So I think the main thing when the region around the Philippines and such, they do export a lot of electrical goods, so semiconductors and things like that. So the supply chain there, the ports and some of the shipping lanes will certainly be impacted, at least for the next week or so, from the typhoon activity.
And there have been a lot of brush fires that are impacting the Northeast in the U.S., especially here in New York. Even just this past weekend, there was a lot of brush fires in Brooklyn and other areas of New York, and you could really smell it in the air quality around the city. Talk to me more about, is this a pattern that we are going to see more of moving forward?
Well, what we can say certainly is that we're coming out of one of the driest periods for this region that we've seen. The October period around the New Jersey, New York area was the driest, not just for October, but for any month on record. So, we kind of set the stage here with very dry conditions. And whenever you see the wind whip up, that's typically when we see some of the spread of the wildfires. In terms of where we go from here, it's sort of a mixed bag. So as we look into sort of week 2, the outlook does suggest that we could see normal or even above normal precipitation or rainfall, so that's going to be helpful. Looking further out into the winter, though, the forecast is uncertain. Some of the forecast models suggest we're going to see more of a normal precipitation pattern, which would be good, and especially good when you think about the reservoirs. This is the time of year where we tend to replenish the reservoirs in advance of the summer, where there's higher demand, but some of the models also suggest it could be a drier pattern. So right now it's kind of very iffy, and we're just going to have to monitor the situation.
As we approach peak hurricane season, what is the outlook for storm activity in the Gulf Coast, and how will this impact industries like oil and natural gas?
Yeah, so amazingly enough, we're talking about the potential here for another storm to impact areas in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So typically at this time of year, 90% of the hurricane season in the Atlantic is over. But this is an unusual year. We're seeing a lot of activity. So just in the last couple days, we saw tropical depression number 19 form near Central America. Typically this time of year, when you do see late season activity, that's the area where we see it. The projection here over the next 4 or 5 days is for it to move into near Central America and then up toward the Yucatan Peninsula. It's after that where the forecasts really start to become uncertain. But some of those forecasts do suggest that the storm could then move into Florida sometime the middle or latter part of next week. So at this point, a lot of uncertainty, but it's definitely something that interests in Florida will need to monitor.
How does climate variability play into the frequency or intensity of hurricanes, or when it comes to typhoons, such as the one that we're seeing right now in Asia?
Yeah, so the short answer is it's complicated. It's more complicated than temperatures, right? So we know the scientists have shown a very strong, high confidence relationship between global temperatures and climate change. But with the tropical cyclones, it's less clear, and the reason is because there's more factors. Of course, tropical cyclones rely on the sea surface temperatures, which are going to warm and are warming. But they also rely on instability in the atmosphere and for the amount of wind shear in the atmosphere. And in terms of how climate change will impact those factors, it's less certain. So overall, it's sort of a less confident forecast, but generally the expectation is we're going to see more intense storms, especially in the Atlantic basin.
And we have about 60 seconds left here, Dave, but I do want to talk to you about how natural events like these happen simultaneously. How do economists, or from your vantage point, how do you prepare from an economic standpoint to weather the storm, so to speak?
Right. I mean, this is something that's being studied very actively by a lot of different groups. With climate change, one of the expectations here is we're going to see not just warmer temperatures, but more extreme weather, more extreme storms. So the potential to see, like we're seeing right now in the West Pacific Basin, 4 typhoons or 4 tropical cyclones active, similar thing in the Atlantic. So the longer answer is there's probably going to have to be a lot of study into how we're going to address these things. But in the short term, certainly we're going to need more resources, because it's not just that we're going to be responding to maybe one active extreme event impacting the United States, but potentially 2 or 3.
And I'm sure this is a story that we are going to continue to cover. Dave, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.